I'm not going to speak a lot because the plan for today's practical session is the following. I think that one of the best way to learn something is to do it by yourself. So today no competitions are planned, no entertainment. I'm going to give you a very detailed notebook with a description of autoencoder and a semi-supervised autoencoder, and you're to fill several parts of this notebook. And so you're just to implement part of this notebook and get through all the text and get familiar with the model. So code is currently available at our summer school GitHub. Again, it's github/BayesGroup/DeepBayes2018. The link is the following. Can you see it? The folder there is day2 VAE, I believe. Yeah, it is. And there is a notebook, a few additional files with pictures. I designed the seminar in such a way that all the models you're going to need train in 10 or 5 minutes. I spent a lot of time tuning all hyperparameters. So if the implementation is correct, everything is going to work, and at the end you'll get beautiful pictures. So it's training in 5 or 10 minutes on CPU on my old MacBook Air. You also have an option of using Google Colab. But the notebook is designed to work on CPU. And if you want to run on GPU faster, you have to fix it to say that tensors are to store on GPU. And being familiar with the last year experience, I have a copy of MNIST on a flash drive because the notebook is going to work with MNIST. And if anyone has problems with internet connection and is unable to download MNIST, feel free to catch me. And by the way, if you have any questions or you want to check your solution, there are assistants here. It's Artem, Sasha, and Andrei. At the corner, Andrei and Sasha. And they'll help you with your implementation. And also Oleg, sitting near the door over there. So let's begin. Okay, where the data set is expected to be, as far as I'm concerned, by default this code downloads MNIST, and if the data set is downloaded, well, in my case it's stored like this. A folder called MNIST, and there are two subfolders, processed and raw. And in raw folder lies the data set as you can download it from Jan LeCun's page. Again, as far as I'm concerned, when you download archives with MNIST and run the cell with code that unpacks MNIST, it creates the folder processed and puts other files in this folder. So all you have to do is just download archives manually or just run the code.
Okay. a little attention. Everyone who is experiencing problems with data and data loading and so on and so forth. We've posted a script on this link, Google. If you run it in the same folder where the MNIST folder is located, it should generate additional files that are needed to work, to download the MNIST, basically. And you also need to disable download equals true in the arguments to the MNIST dataset. And that should work.
I feel like I have to make a comment why I pay so much attention to storing logits instead of probabilities. Because people sometimes ask questions about this. Well, imagine you have a neural network that outputs probabilities for binary pixels being white or black. If you store the output of this network as a probability, after computing the sigmoid as the last non-linearity, well, you will have very small numbers after the network initialization. And then if you want to compute log probability, you'll have to compute log of this probability. And this will result in computing something like log of exp, which is mathematically an identical transformation. But nevertheless, if you compute something like this using standard functions, it will behave very unstably. So therefore, you have to use you have to compute log of x explicitly, or use stable implementation of such transformations. For example, you may need to compute something that looks like log of unity plus exponent of x. When you compute the normalization constant in Bernoulli probability. And to compute this, we have a specific function which is called soft plus. Or, okay, soft plus. And once again, storing probabilities, not logits, is very unstable when you try to compute log probability. Any more problems with MNIST? How many of you succeeded in implementing Bernoulli vector and multivariate normal DAG? So, how many of you completed the first two tasks with distribution implementation? Can you raise your hands? Okay. Well, for those of you, a small comment on the next cell. So you did this, and then you went through a lot of text, and then you'll be asked to implement a loss function for variational autoencoder. Probably today you've been told that for variational autoencoder, you can compute a part of loss, the KL divergence, analytically. And indeed, this is true. But for your convenience, I suggest you to implement it with point estimates. That means you just compute log props of P of Z and Q of Z, and then use a stochastic estimate for KL divergence. It will be simpler. And that you won't lose much in terms of accuracy of the method. Guys, if you're trying to implement the loss function, elbow for the simplest VAE, you may run into problems if you forget to make scale positive. The default architecture in the notebook has no non-linearities at the end of encoder. So the second half of the vector may be negative, and in this case you'll end up with problems. So you have to make it positive explicitly to load classes. Okay. As for normal distribution, it is even simpler. All the functions that we compute here are stable. I compute logarithm of scale, which I assume to be stable. Square term, normalization constant is then added to square term, and then I compute log prob. This is a simple function, but there are many details. And pay attention to the sampling function, because it is very important for the reprioritization trick and the implementation of autoencoder, because it explicitly separates the randomness, which you plug into your stochastic graph, which has no parameters, and the parameters of our distribution. So it blends it with a deterministic transformation. We multiply the standard normal tensor by scale vector and then add log. So a very simple implementation. So then you have to get through all the descriptions of autoencoder, and after this you'll end up with this simple loss function. It proceeds in a few steps following this picture. So first we run x through encoder. Okay. And then we, after running through the encoder, get the parameters of our distribution. These are the scale, which is the first half of the output of encoder. And the log and scale is soft plus of the second half of the output. So I pass these parameters to our small class and get a distribution, which then I sample from. So this is this part when I proceed to Z. Now I have Z. And sorry, can you repeat your question? Okay. So then I sample Z, and when I have Z, I can compute the log of prior probability. To do this, I define a standard normal distribution and compute its log probability. I can define the conditional distribution. I run that through decoder and define the Bernoulli vector class instance. And after this, I sum terms for conditional probability, prior probability for Z, and log probability for our variational distribution, average them over the batch, and this is my last function. Any questions? Yes? Of course, I'm going to publish this notebook with all the cells filled in. And then after, yeah, question? So soft plus is just a non-linearity, which is used to make scale positive, because when you compute log probability of normal distribution, you have to use positive scale. So if you've managed to implement all of this, you'll end up with a model that outputs reconstructions that look like this. And they're a bit blurrier than reconstructions of autoencoder. And this is a huge disadvantage of variational autoencoders. When you work with natural images, the reconstructions usually are much more blurrier than reconstructions of fancier adversarial models or other fancier generative models. However, when you compare it to a simple autoencoder you were to implement during the application season, you can see that interpolations are a little better than the one I've shown you in the beginning of the notebook. So, as I see it, only one of 5 interpolations outputs something very strange, something that does not look like a digit. And then t-SNEs. If you plot t-SNEs for means of variational approximation, you can see that t-SNEs arrange very neatly according to class of the digit. It's not surprising because you have to learn a continuous function that outputs digits, and since it's continuous, probably similar outputs will have similar inputs. This is not necessary, but very likely to happen. Okay. And now the semi-supervised VAE. I didn't make you implement the Gumbel softmax because I understood that we will be out of time. However, you're to implement the last function. It's pretty big. It looks like this in my case. I'm not going to spoil it. The last function is as big as these 2 computational graphs. But in 10 minutes I'll show you the resulting pictures, which you'll also be able to look at after the seminar. For those of you who are still here, I'm going to show the pictures for the second part. If you get through all the details, you'll get the following model. It will have 95% accuracy at the full test set at NIST, and it will have the following. It will work the following way. For example, if you want to generate a given digit, you generate a standard normal Z, and then plug in one hot encoding for the class you want to generate. And as a result, you will get something like this. These pictures are not perfect. However, they are very distinctive. These are zeros. These are ones. 2s and 3s are sort of mixed. However, you can see that something works. Another beautiful visualization is the style transfer. You plug in an example from the test set, get latent representation for this example. You already know the class. You get the latent representation, which has to describe the style of this number. And indeed, it works in some cases. For example, for this bold 3, you get Z. Then you plug this particular Z and other one hot encodings and get these numbers, which are all bold. These curvy zeros gives you other curvy digits, and so on. To be honest, this model is heavily underfitted, and 16 epochs are this is are not enough to feed the model, and you can get even better results if you train more. And the last thing is t-SNE. As you can remember, t-SNE for embeddings in VAE gave you a picture in which embeddings were aligned with class label. Here, this is not the case. Embeddings are completely random when you draw t-SNE for means of that. However, if you plot t-SNE for logits of y, the part which was used to predict classes, you can see that this thing perfectly aligns with labels, almost perfectly. And there are very few mistakes. So this sort of proves that we were able to build disentangled representations for digits that filter representations for class in one part and representations for all other informations in the other part of the embedding. And I wanted to conclude this practical session with saying that this is a very big advantage of variational autoencoders, that you can design complex priors that can give you power to build complex representations, which are sometimes meaningful due to carefully designed priors. Thank you.